Hey, Justin, how are you?
I'm doing well, Melanie. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I am ready when you are.
Okay, perfect. Are we recording?
We are now, yes.
Okay, great. Um, Good day, and welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of the State Bar. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Mr. Ewert, can you call the roll, please?
Broughton, Chen,
Here.
Selig,
Here.
Shelby,
Present.
Tony.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Sorry. Now we'll have public comment. Um, If there are, I don't believe we have anyone present here as it relates to public comment in person, but if there is someone who is online and can be recognized by the staff, that would be great. For those participating by Zoom video, you should have a function for virtually raising your hand. It is a hand icon that appears at the bottom center of your screen if you wish to address the committee. Please click on the hand icon now, and State Bar staff will call on you in the order that hands are raised. For those participating by phone, you may virtually raise your hand by pressing *9. That is the star key, then number 9. Again, doing so will alert staff that you would like to make a comment, and State Bar staff will call on you and open your microphone so you can address the committee. Due to time restrictions, we cannot allow more than 3 minutes for each speaker. And can
Chair
you please,
Shelby,
yes,
we have one member of the public that has raised their hand.
excellent.
It is Todd Hill.
Greetings, Mr. Hill. You have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I promise you I will not take up 3 minutes because this is more of an overall apparent policy conversation than what you have on the agenda today. So we'll respect your time for your actual topics of the day. But I would like to mention that it has come to my attention from the state auditor's office that the bar submits data for its own audit. And it seems to me to be the case that that is not an appropriate way to guarantee a true audit. It seems that the scope has been solely focused on, well, I can't say because the bar has determined what that focus is really. And so the state auditor's office is sort of left with a very, very narrow scope report that doesn't talk about any internal discipline issues or rates or any of the things that would happen in a normal corporation, in a normal business as it's run and functions, right? The bar has existed for many, many years without appropriate conflict of interest policies when it knows it had a duty to install them by statutory mandate. So it seems odd to me that folks who talk very constantly about transparency have a policy that actually would frustrate that by definition. It's a tautology almost. Thank you very much for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
There are no other hands raised.
Okay, excellent. Next, we will move to the consent calendar. Actually, I don't think we have anything on consent. I'm sorry.
Oh, we do have
We do.
two
We do.
items
I'm
on
sorry.
consent.
We have 2 items on consent. My apologies. I'm sorry. I've got too many tabs up. Give me one moment, please. Okay, here we go. Next, we will move to consent. Would any members wish to pull an item off the consent calendar? If not, can we receive a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Chen, second by Saleg. And can you please call the roll?
Broughton, Chen,
Yes.
Selig,
Yes.
Tony.
Aye.
That is 3-4, none against. The motion passes.
Thank you. Next, we will move to our third item, which is business, a discussion of the organizational audit focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I believe you are going to lead this item.
Thank you, Melanie. Yes, we have discussed this many times at our biweekly calls, and now we're bringing it to the full committee. One of the foundational components of the strategic plan is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at the audit committee's last meeting, we adopted changes to the work plan to incorporate the strategic plan and its goals. The organizational audit with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion was added to the work plan at this time. Today, we're going to discuss what we would like to focus on and narrow down the scope of this organizational audit. The discussion will be a presentation by my colleague, Carolina Almirante, and on the report card on diversity of the California legal profession. And then Leah Wilson will provide us an overview of the other diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at the bar. For example, what we're doing with staff and in the discipline system. And then after those discussions and presentations, we'll have a robust discussion on the focus of this audit. So I am going to turn it over to Carolina today to give that presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen. So for today, we are going to review just very high level, some key items from the report card on diversity of California legal profession. And I will be talking through some of the data points, and if there's any questions, we can ask them towards the end. Sorry, just a second, my slide. Okay, great. So the diversity report card was published in August 2022, and this was a collaborative effort between ORIA, the Office of Access and Inclusion, as well as the Council on Access, and several of their members reviewed the report as well. So it was a collaborative effort. It's not the first time that we published a report, but it is the first time that we made it through an online platform. And what has been a great attention brought to the report through several press coverage have been some of the disparities that are shown in the report regarding disparities of attorneys of color in leadership roles, as well as overall comparison to the state population. And so it's been good to see.
Carolina, could you move a bit closer to the mic or
Oh.
something's not? Thanks.
My apologies. Can you hear me better now?
It's pretty low. I don't.
Okay, let me see if I can put on the headset.
I will comment, I can hear her fine online, so I don't know if it's a room issue.
And we can hear you fine.
Oh.
While she's testing her sound, I'll just say this is the most positive press coverage I've ever seen the bar get, is with this 2022 diversity report card. And I do think the transition to the online platform as opposed to a PDF really facilitated that. And so hopefully.
Okay. Yes,
Okay.
and Leah, I was just about to make that point, how the online platform has allowed for this information to circulate much faster than a PDF, as well as the component of the report, which includes interactive data points where the user can dig deeper into specific sectors and populations of their choosing. So to talk sort of very high level on the diversity report card, the report card is based on data collected from several sources. So the key data set, the key source rather, is the attorney census. And so the attorney census is a voluntary survey that's provided to California licensed attorneys. And we have a short and long version. So the short version includes just basic demographic information, and the long version provides more of the employment questions. And that was administered in 2021. And in 2022, we administered the demographic short survey. The report also includes information from the 2020 impact survey, which was a one-time survey sent out in 2021 to understand the impact of COVID and also the shifts in racial perspectives in the nation for our attorney population. The key demographic data that we consistently capture are race, ethnicity, gender identity, transgender, sexual orientation, veteran status, as well as attorneys with disabilities. And we received a 68% response rate for our active attorneys. So this report reflects responses from active attorneys.
Carolina, I have a question just from a time frame standpoint, and I appreciate you sharing I think you said 68%. Are people incentivized to complete this census, and what's the time frame that they have in terms of completion?
So the initial implementation of the attorney census included attorneys completing the survey through their fee paying process online through my Bar profile. And so the first two surveys were administered that way. The impact survey was through a separate link that was sent to a subset of attorneys.
Thank you.
And there are no incentives. And this coming year, I'm a little concerned because we are going to bifurcate the fee payment process from the survey completion process. Because unfortunately, what was happening is those licensees that didn't want to take the survey, and there are several, right? They were choosing to bypass online payment altogether. And we saw a significant increase in paper versus online payment. And that leads to all sorts of other issues. And so we don't want to disincentivize using the online payment portal. So we may have to think about some incentives for the next go round.
And so the next few slides are going to focus on the 2022 demographic data. What we learned from looking at demographic data from the prior years is there hasn't been significant shifts. So the trends still stay consistent. And that consistency lies on this point that white people comprise 39% of the state adult population, yet are 66% of California's active licensed attorneys. And so the chart on your left shows that comparison between the California adult population with that of the attorney population. And the key points here are that 39% are white in the California population, but 61% are people of color, and you see the reverse for the California attorney population. On the right, you would see a chart with the disaggregated race ethnicities. And so here you would see the comparison of a population at the state level versus the California attorney population. And one thing to highlight that has been also highlighted in press releases is the disparity gap amongst the different racial ethnic groups, specifically for Hispanic and Latino, where 36% are represented make up the California adult population, but 6% are part of the state population. And so that's the largest disparity gap that we see across the racial ethnic groups. We also collect information on gender identity. And we see here to your left a comparison of men and women in the adult population, California's adult population, and that of the attorneys. 51% are women in California adult population and 49% are men. Where in the state attorney population, you see 55% are men, 44% are women, and 1% are non-binary. We also collect information on transgender identification. And in the California adult population, we have 0.49%, whereas in the 2022 California attorneys population is 0.26%. So what's really great about our data is the ability to do sort of these deeper analysis, which includes not only just looking at gender identity alone or race ethnicity alone, but in the intersection. And so here you're seeing the intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender identity. And so if you were to focus on the chart to your right, you would see that on the bottom, you have 40% white men, 26% white women, white non-binary attorneys are 0.4%, 16% men of color, and 18% women of color. And you have 0.3 for non-binary attorneys of color. And the numbers on the side is just to show you sort of overall, this represents 66% white attorneys when you look at all the groups listed there, and then 34% are attorneys of color. And the key takeaway here is that you do see that white men comprise the largest group of California attorneys, and then second to them would be white women, women of color, and then men of color. And one thing that's really great on the online report is that you can get this information by gender and then specific gender identity and specific racial ethnicity. We also collect information on attorneys with disabilities, their veteran status, and sexual orientation. And the key highlights here are that the gap that we're seeing the most in these three groups are with attorneys with disabilities, where 23% of the California adult population identify as having a disability, where only 6% of the state population. But we are comparable when it comes to attorneys that identify as veterans and those that are LGBTQIA+, where 5% are in the adult population for veterans and similar for state attorneys, and then 9% in California adult population for LGBTQIA+, similar for state attorneys. Here we're looking specifically at those who are newly admitted to the legal profession. And what's very interesting about this chart is looking at the percent over time. So we were looking at the data just from 2022, but here we're looking at from 1970 to 2021. And what this demonstrates are populations being admitted women, and then populations being admitted for people of color. And the trend continues to stay upward, where new populations continue to be more diverse with a higher number of women and people of color. You do see a slight drop in the 2020 admitted cohort, and that was due to shifts in bar exam scheduling. However, those numbers quickly recoup in 2021, where the newly admitted attorneys who were women and people of color increased to 56% and 53%. And this continues to be the trend. So taking a step back, we talked about the 2022 demographic data. Now we're going to focus on 2021 data that we collected on where attorneys work. And just very big picture, and many of you may already know that on the right here shows where attorneys work in terms of their primary employment. Majority are working in the private sector. So you have 39% work in law firms, 22% work in solo practitioner, and then 15% are in a corporate setting, and the remainder in the other private sector. And the second group would be then the government sector. So in terms of where attorneys work, how does that then shift based on the demographic group? So a way to read this chart to your left is looking at each different category, where do they work? And so if you look at just total 2021 California attorneys, you see a majority are working in the private sector. But how does that change in different groups? So for white attorneys, it resembles similar to the state population. But then for attorneys of color, you see 36% in law firms. So you see a slight decrease there. The numbers do shift. So here for non-binary is 29%, 36% for women, and then decreasing for attorneys with disabilities. However, the shift in government and the percentages also change, where you do see attorneys of color also being represented there in government, slightly higher from the state population. So again, you can go into each category and see how that changes. And again, on the online report, you can use interactive figures to drill down on these specific groups. So this is another way of looking at the data. So before we were looking at specific demographic groups. Here, we're going to focus on each sector. So how do you read this chart? You would look at each sector, and then we look at the distribution of race, ethnicity, and gender identity for that specific sector. So again, we're comparing to the total 2021 California attorney population, where 40% are white men and 27% are white women. And then you have a collective 33% attorneys of color, 15% are men of color, and 17% are women of color. How does it shift as you go across the chart? So you see in law firms, the number does increase for white men, even more so for solo practitioner, and then decrease as you get towards the public sector, whereas attorneys of color are showing higher representation in the public sector. So here we're looking at attorneys in executive roles. So what's really rich about our data set is that in the 2021 attorney census, we expanded on our employment data and the questions that we asked. We worked with Aaron Reeves, who is a expert on looking at diversity in the legal profession, and provided us insight on how to capture more robust information on employment, not only just by sector, but by position, and understanding how it varies in executive roles. So here we are looking at total 2021 California attorneys. And the way to look at the chart is there's 40% white men in the 2021 California attorney population. But what is the percentage of them that are executive? So 48% of 48% white men are in executive positions. And so when you compare then to law firms, 42% white men are in law firms, but 53% are in executive roles. Where we see the disparity gap is with women of color. So here for total 2021 California attorneys, there's 17% women of color, but 12% in executive roles. And then you look at law firms, women of color comprise of 16% of law firm attorneys, yet are 9% of law firm executives. And this disparity is consistent across all sectors. And again, in the online report, you can look at each different sector and see that disparity and make comparison. We also looked at taking a deeper dive into law firms and understanding partners and shareholders disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender identity. So to your chart on your left, you have demographic representation among law firm partners and shareholders. Here, the comparison is total attorneys in law firms, where 41% are white men, 26% are white women, 15% are women of color, and 16% are non-binary of color. These percentages then shift when you look at who's in these partner or shareholder positions. 55% are now white men, and then the numbers decrease for attorneys of color. So you see the disparity gap there. Another way of looking at this data is specifically those that are in those positions and the type of partner and shareholder they are. So here we're looking at the rate of participation type of law firm partner shareholder by demographic group. We're going to focus on equity for this example. And again, you look at the way to read the charts, you look at the specific demographic group, and what are they experiencing. So total partners, shareholders, 74% in equity type of position. But how does that vary for women of color? That's now 64%, and then 63% for non-binary attorneys of color. So again, an opportunity to highlight a little bit more of where disparities exist. We also
Can I
asked.
interject with a comment on that last piece of data, Carolina, which I found very interesting and is very useful for people in law firm management. I think that looking at the data in a different way would make it even more useful for law firms, which is taking the whole population of equity shareholders and partners. What percentage of them are white men, what percentage are people of color, because that's a number that then law firms can compare themselves to. Because when you dice it this way, it's interesting, but a firm can't look at it and measure themselves against it. So
Yeah.
I know, I mean, you have the data, it's just a
Yes,
different way of presenting it.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Any other points on this slide? In the attorney census, we capture workplace satisfaction. So there's 15 factors that we ask attorneys to rate their level of satisfaction on. And in this slide, we provide these 3 composites. So there's individual career, collective workplace, and work-life balance. And an example of individual career would be mentoring opportunities is a factor there. Collective workplace, another example would be how diverse your colleagues are. And then work-life balance would be autonomy over your work and flexibility in your time. And as you read these the charts, you see the total 21 California attorneys on top as their rate of satisfaction compared to the different categories or demographic groups that are listed on the bottom. And so the key takeaway that we have here is that attorneys identify as non-binary, white, and of color report the lowest satisfaction levels with workplace experiences across all 3 domains. And then when we look at disparity gaps, we noted that the satisfaction gap between white men and women of color is largest in workplace experience related to individual career. So this is a lot of information, but what's great about this is that through this report, we also lead the reader to calls to action. And so in the report, we have a calls to action section that looks at providing guidance on how this data can help those, whether you're an employer or you're in the profession yourself, what can you do with this information to try to make some change? So for employers, the key section that we have is how to promote transparency and accountability, building an inclusive workplace culture, diversifying recruitment strategies and pipelines, retain and advance and empower staff. And for attorneys, the sections that we have are transparency and accountability, contribute to an inclusive workplace culture, be an active ally, expand your DEI toolkit, advancement and well-being and benefits. And with close coordination with our Office of Access Inclusion and Council on Access Fairness, we created these targeted call to action for different types of sectors. So attorneys can take this information and look at it for their population, for their employment type, and see how they can potentially make change. And that is the end of my presentation.
I just, first of all, I want to say thank you, Carolina, and welcome to the Audit Committee. I think this is your first time joining us. When I saw this online, I think it's just an amazing tool. And I think back to when we were here, gosh, some 4 months ago, talking about the strategic plan. And in particular, we talked about the State Bar being this incredible resource tool for attorneys and for law firms. And so as much as I appreciate the call to action and want to draw everybody to the State Bar website, my question really is, as it relates to getting this out externally, and kudos on all of the great media hits, but where does it go from here after, so what transpires externally in terms of getting this information out to the audience, that the audiences, plural, that really could benefit from it?
So there is a diversity summit that's scheduled for October, and the goal there is to dig deeper on these topics. And our Office of Access Inclusion and Council on Access Fairness are helping and coordinating those efforts with the State Bar.
Okay.
And some of the other things we're doing, we've presented this data to many different statewide and affinity and local bar associations. We've had a request to create a similar slide deck that other entities can use to deliver the information on their own. And then we've also gotten requests for specialized or deeper dives into some of the data for population-specific purposes. So for example, if we're an upcoming AAPI conference, I think it's Calipaba, they are going to do a special presentation focused on Asian women in the law. And so Carolina and the team have been doing a particular dive into our data set with respect to that population, and we'll be presenting specific data at that convening. And so as those requests, I similarly am going to do a presentation on women in the law generally at at Berkeley Law, I guess it's called now. And I'll be doing one in at Stanford as well. So each of these, the request is for a slightly different focus area. And that's another way that we're working to get it out. But it is, I think, a challenge, and this goes to one of your comments, Hyland, to get it out into the law firms and with the right people at law firms, because there's no clear sort of distribution list that we have access to for managing partners, for example, or chief diversity officers. I'm not even sure who it should go to, and that's sort of potentially a to-do for us to discuss.
Have you talked about partnering with organizations that do have a ton of membership, like LCLD? I'm thinking of the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity has a ton of members. And, you know, CMCP in California, the California Minority Corporate Council or whatever they stand for. I think there's just organizations that have like significant and robust membership that send out email blasts. And that's they email blast every diversity professional at every law firm. That's the way to spread the word.
Okay.
Because I know that, I get those email blasts from those organizations. I know the diversity professionals at my firm and at all the other firms get them. And to have this report and the seal be part of that is the way to get the word out, I think.
And we are partnering with CMPC, but I wasn't even aware of LCD. So I think that, and potentially just sort of transitioning or to talk about the audit, this is the kind of action step that could come out of it, because it's obviously a great product, but I think there's much room to improve in the dissemination.
Clarification, for those of us who don't practice law, CMPC is
Corporate Minority Council project or program or partnership.
Program.
CMC. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Tony, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair Shelby. I wanted to let Carolina and the staff know how impressed I am by this report. And my only request is that it be posted on the agenda part for this audit committee, because it's not posted. And that in the future get posted early, because this is the first time I've seen it. I use the agenda to know what I'm supposed to be reading.
No, I agree with you. I actually emailed Justin during this presentation because we've tried to do a much better job of getting all the PowerPoints posted in advance, and this one didn't make it. So I apologize. We'll certainly send it out in next week's board blast. We can actually post it to the agenda as well so the public can see it. But next time it'll be part of the package.
Thank you, that's all.
But it is on the, I saw it because it is on the front page of the State Bar.
The overall
The
report
overall
card,
report
yeah.
card is. Yeah.
So I don't know, Trustee Shelby, just looking at the time, I think the intention was to do some brainstorming about the audit, the DEI audit that's on the work plan. I have, what is posted to the agenda is something that I've actually had prepared for to present to the whole board, I think maybe at the July board meeting, which is an overall sort of overview of all of our DEI efforts. I don't know if you'd like me to kind of quickly go through that, or if you want to launch right into the discussion of what the audit should be. And I also want to just state the obvious that Trustee Tony, what we're talking about here directly ties to your comments about the EOB fund and how we support this work. because as you'll see, if I do go through my slide deck, we're doing a lot. And we're doing a lot, you know, that beyond what would be supported by a $2 voluntary donation.
I think it would be great to, I realize that we are behind in time, but I think it would be great to proceed, because I think
Okay.
it's an important conversation and I don't want to minimize it.
Okay, can you put that up, Justin? Okay, you can advance. And if you click on the bottom, we're not exactly in presenter mode. Which one does he click on, Louisa?
We are in presenter mode. He just needs to click the right of the screen and it'll advance.
Okay, so what we've done on DEI, so,
Sorry.
okay, Justin, you could go forward. You see that's supposed to be me. Okay, so what we've done, so the profession and then the pipeline. So obviously the attorney report card, you just saw that. The summits and the calls to action, you heard about those. Providing data to local and affinity bars, I mentioned that as well. In addition, the board directed that the elimination of bias requirement, the mandatory continuing legal education requirement, be doubled, and that occurred. I think now that went into effect last year or the year before. We launched a corresponding e-learning module that is available to all licensees. And the Supreme Court, upon the recommendation of the board, adopted a new rule of professional conduct directly related to discrimination and harassment in the profession. And we have put out a training video. I'm not going to call it a typical training video. It's an animated short about how to comply with this and why it's important to comply with this new rule. In terms of the pipeline, we have, for the first time in the 2022 budget, fully funded the Bar Exam Strategies and Stories program. This is the productive or positive mindset intervention for bar exam test takers that had previously been funded by a grant and was considered a pilot effort. We produced differential DIF, differential item functioning informed guidelines for the development of questions on the bar exam. So this is based on a differential item functioning analysis that was completed to see how different populations of similarly situated test takers perform on bar exam questions. So this means folks you would expect to perform at the same level, the only difference being their race. We took a look at how they performed on various bar exam questions, and as a result of that study, developed new guidelines for how bar exam questions need to be developed. We now track bar exam grader diversity, so who's grading our bar exams. We required the schools, the law schools that the state bar quote unquote oversees. Those are our California accredited schools and the registered schools. We now are reporting them to, requiring them to report demographic data. And that's helping us with that last item to be able to assess attrition by race and gender. Right now, we only are able to do that for the ABA law schools. You can advance. In terms of the discipline system, obviously, you know, we've done our study of racial disparities in the discipline system, and in the new strategic plan are slated to update that analysis in 2024. Based on that study, we archived closed complaints, and we are now providing additional resources to attorneys when cases are closed. Basically saying, yes, this complaint has been closed, but we suggest some resources to you to help potentially avoid future complaints. The board established the ad hoc commission on the discipline system in large part in response to that FARCUS study. And today you will be asked to issue those recommendations for public comment. We also, this is also going to come up today, have begun to apply kind of a racial impact and equity lens to other aspects of our work. So that ASAR acronym stands for something that I can't quite remember. I call it probation redesign. But what you will see on your agenda today is an update on this probation supervision assessment tool. So applying sort of an equity lens to multiple areas of our work beyond just those that we've specifically targeted thus far. You could advance. A look at ourselves. So this is ourselves as an employer. We report on our staff demographics by classification, and this is important, not just what the overall composition of our workforce looks like, but who's in leadership in the organization. We have a DEI plan, we have a speaker series, and I think we've done some really good work internally to that end. We have mandatory implicit bias training, again, not just for our staff, but for all state bar volunteers. And in the new strategic plan, we talk about specific DEI training and implicit bias training in particular for decision makers. So there we're talking about OCTC, state bar court, probation, admissions investigators, those who are in a position to make important decisions that affect people's lives. Go forward. What we will do, and all of this is reflected somewhere in the plan. So update that FARCUS analysis, consider the ad hoc commission recommendations, a report on law school matriculation and attrition by race and gender, publish another report card next year, and more calls to action, and launch the Leadership SEAL program. So if you can advance the slide, I have one. Oh, not the Leadership SEAL program yet. We ourselves are going to pursue the Leadership SEAL. I'm going to get to that next. We're going to implement blind recruiting here at the state bar. That means the names are going to come off of the applications. We are going to bring forward to the board a request to approve a contract to conduct a procurement disparity study. You've also heard in finance talk about revising our investment policy. And then the diversity, equity, and inclusion audit that the audit committee is going to lead. You could go forward, Justin. This is the Leadership SEAL. This is an effort led by our Office of Access and Inclusion. Basically, this is a SEAL program that we are going to put forward for all legal employers. So this would be government, nonprofit, and private, obviously, and encourage people to pursue this SEAL. There are 8 different elements to this SEAL, and I think, I hope the staff doesn't kill me for butchering this, but I think you've got to achieve 5 of the 8, and you get to select the 5 in order to get the SEAL. We are working specifically with corporate CMPC to help us finalize what the components of this SEAL program will look like, and also to appropriately distinguish it from other such SEALs that exist, and namely the Mansfield rule. So I think in terms of sort of walking the talk, it is important that we ourselves pursue the SEAL as an employer. If we can go forward. Oh, that's
believe that's it.
In the board agenda item, I did provide, I guess it's not the VISME, but it is in the PDF. You do have the most recent staff demographic report. So that was posted to the agenda, and happy to answer questions about that. I'm not going to go over it here, but I did want to share with the committee that we do collect and report out on this data to the entire staff. So that's it.
First off, when I read this in the presentation, thank you, because I do think walking the talk is so important. And thank you for articulating the SEAL. I think that is going to be a wonderful tool for people to utilize. And this is probably more of a comment per se, and it gets back to something that I had shared earlier with, I believe it's Carolina, as it relates to how do you, and we've talked about this, Luis and I have had this conversation, and Lizette, as we've been looking at applicants, and how do you encourage people to complete survey information in a way that, and how do you inform them in a way where they understand the value and the importance of capturing demographic information, and that it's not intrusive, but it really aids the overall health and wellness of the organization to understand and know where people are coming from a demographic standpoint. And I don't know how to solve that, and I don't know if incentives, incentives are the right direction for that, but I think that is a bigger question that I would love to, get the answer to, if anyone knows a way of achieving that. Anything else?
I just wanted to also comment on the staff demographics report, which I found really helpful to see. I know that we have separately in the past looked at board demographics, and I think that if we're taking a look at bar leadership, that looking at executives and staff should also include looking at board demographics. Separately, I have raised a concern a number of times that I am the only woman practicing attorney serving on the board. All the other attorneys are men, and it's been that case for a while. And so I do think it's important to keep looking at the demographics.
Thank you, Chair Shelby. Very, very useful report. I was intrigued by the seal part, and I'll just throw out that I like the idea of having some flexibility with getting the shield, but I also think that all 8 are pretty good too. And so we could take a page from like the lead building, the energy efficiency, which uses like a silver, gold, and platinum, so that you could just think about that, of saying the 5 get you silver and all 8 get you platinum, and somewhere in between get you gold. So anyway, just a thought that the nice thing about a seal is that there's flexibility built into it.
That's a great idea.
Any other comments?
Just in terms of next steps for the audit that this committee wants to conduct, so I think you have, today a good overview of what we've done and what's planned. I don't know what would be useful as a next step. Hey, Sonia. We're still in audit. We're not in the board meeting yet, Sonia.
Okay, I'm
Do you have any thoughts in terms of next steps?
Well, we're doing a lot. I think that many of these things would benefit from identified outcome metrics, something we're trying to achieve, for example, with the diversity report card, better reach into the law firm world. I don't know exactly how we would measure it, but I would say we're pretty low. We're at a low level right now. It might still be sort of a qualitative measure, but I think that would be helpful. Like, what is it that we're trying to achieve, right? I think that would be needed and useful. And then maybe in the course of doing that, are there areas that we really haven't touched yet, both with respect to the profession and then with respect to the state bar as an employer and as an organization that really works with and through hundreds of volunteers, including the board? Is there more work to be done in that area as well?
I would offer that I think that's a great place to stop, and maybe people put some thought into that. And I don't know, Justin, if we can poll the audit committee or maybe throw out some great questions that will get people thinking, and then when we reconvene, be able to have a more robust conversation.
We can do whatever the chair wants. I think Leah has kind of given a framework of measuring what we do, kind of getting outputs, but then also if I got suggestions between meetings of areas of focus, we could maybe do a little research on those areas that, in addition to what we're currently doing, we could add on and bring presentation to see if the full audit committee wants to add that into the scope of the audit. I think we could do that.
Okay, great. I think that's a great course of action. With that, we are going to adjourn